Okay, our next topic is activism and social justice movements, which is really the purpose of this channel. Um, so, Without further ado, the first book I want to talk about is called Christians, Blasphemers, and Witches, Afro-Mexican Ritual Practice in the 17th Century by Joan Cameron Bristol. Now, the reason I read this book is because when Vanessa Guillen, was that her name? The girl that was in the army that got killed in Texas on base. There was a big, movement around that, and I thought it was important to support that movement for justice. But there was the way that it was kind of put forth, especially by like raza activists or non-activists, was that it was in conflict or kind of in rivalry with the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement around George Floyd and stuff like that. And there was a lot of like negativity, and it was racial, like black versus brown stuff. And I was, it was disturbing. It was disturbing. And I thought that, if our people had a deeper understanding about about the history of African descended people in Latin America and here, then we would have more solidarity. And I have a lot of books about Afro-Mexicans, but I chose to read this one because it kind of tied in with my reading about spirituality and religion. And so this book is interesting. It just basically uses mostly Inquisition records, but also some records of some like saints and stuff like that, hagiographies or whatnot, of African descended people in New Spain, Mexico, and talks about some of the practices of Afro-Mexicans, Afro-descended people in Mexico, and also like some of the ways that those African spirituality influenced non-African people in New Spain and colonial Mexico. So it was interesting, and it also talks about demographics. It talks about how at some point, at a certain point, she cites one of the writers. You going through Mexico City, there was basically a very, very large African population, black population there. And nowadays people say stuff like Afro-Mexicans only make up 1% of Mexican society, but there's only been a option on the Mexican census since like 2015, and so there's always been an undercount, and also there was not the kind of prohibition against intermarriage that there was, like, for example, here in the United States. So even though maybe people of African, the African root was kind of really much more absorbed into the mainstream of Mexican society, more so than it was in places like the United States, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it's only 1%. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I think there's a lot to learn from the study of Afro-Mexicans and of people of African descent in Latin America, which is why I ended up getting this book, the Henry Louis Gates book, The Black in Latin America, because it goes, takes a lot bigger picture. And I do hope to do more reading about Afro-Mexicans from the the other books that I have on hand. So yeah, Christians, Blasphemers, and Witches by Joan Cameron Bristol. So, and then another book that I read is called Revolutionary Hillbilly. This is by Thurman, and I actually got him to sign it for me. I bought this from James Tracy. So the reason I read this one, just to backtrack a little bit, most of my activist life, I've been reading and studying social movements of cultures other than my own. I mean, I'm part Mexican, but most of my heritage is white, Euro-descended. And so I've been reading, civil rights, Black Power, Chicano movement, Native Americans, that kind of stuff. And I was really, I don't know, I just didn't feel like didn't have a lot of interest in reading about white people and their struggles, besides like some of the more radical labor struggles like the IWW and stuff like that. And the stuff that I did read, especially about like the Weather Underground and SDS, I really didn't like it. The movements were very paternalistic and stuff like that. But I came to realize that it was really important, especially for me as a person with white privilege, to study those movements and learn from them, especially where they did good things. And so that's why I read Hillbilly Nationalists, which I reviewed in a previous video, which was by James Tracy. And one of the people that they talk about in that book was this guy, Thurman, who finally wrote his memoir. And this is good. He's a poor white person. He comes from the South. He comes from Appalachia. He goes up to Chicago. He's part of the Young Patriots. And so he talks about organizing in uptown Chicago with other poor white people. And he ends up getting an education, being an educator, being an organizer, ends up going back down south, is repressed down there. So it was an interesting story. And the Patriots, they did some things like using the rebel flag, the Confederate flag, as their symbol, that he says, by now he rejects it, obviously, but they were much more connected to the working class, white people. So they didn't have a lot of fall into like a lot of the traps that like SDS and these educated, people that are look down on working class people and are more interested in theory and having the right line and stuff like that, than these people who are really actually connected to the people. So I enjoyed this one, Revolutionary Hillbilly: Notes from the Struggle on the Edge of the Rainbow by Thurman. Then this one was a really fun book to read. This is John Brown. It's W.E.B. Du Bois's biography of John Brown, and the reason why this one was so much fun to read is because I read it as part of a book club, which I haven't done for years. I haven't been a part of a book club except for maybe one other time. And this was great. This was organized by one of my comrades from the Independent Media Center, and we were reading together with activists, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, so we were all connected online, but we didn't use Zoom. We used kind of more non-proprietary ways to connect, and we had a chat going over on Discord and lots of other supplemental information, and we were able to connect the things that W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about in this book to current things that we're working on or current struggles that we see going on. And one of the questions we kind of kept on coming back to is, who's John Brown now? Where's John Brown now? And so that's why, having read about these hillbilly nationalists kind of really helped feed into that conversation, because that's the question, where is white solidarity with people of color in their struggles against racism and oppression today? You don't really see it. I mean, it's there, here and there, but anyways, this is a really, really great experience to read it with comrades and to read it together. We took turns facilitating the discussion. We took turns giving a summary of the chapter. We took turns. It was great. It was a really, really good experience. And W.E.B. Du Bois, he's just such a great writer. So when he talks about John Brown, he does it in a way that, really envelops his understanding of U.S. history and Western history and of African history too. I mean, it's because of this that I end up getting a lot of these books. This book about Esteban, this book, The Secret Six, which is about the other white people that were supporting John Brown, rich people, Black Reconstruction, which is not about John Brown, but is another W.E.B. Du Bois book that I hope to read sometime soon. So yeah, this one was a really great experience to read John Brown by W.E.B. Du Bois. And this one was another actually really great book I was able to read with my partner, called The Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza. She's known as one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was able to get this book free because the organization I work for is affiliated to the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And she was on staff, and then she was on the board of the NDWA. She's still connected to the NDWA, so they gave it away. And I finally got around to reading it. There's a decent amount of literature now about the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Black Lives Matter phenomenon within the larger racial justice movement, or Black Power movement. Maybe we should talk about those books sometime soon. But it was really interesting because it's her memoir. She's talking about how she grew up, her life experiences, and we're basically the same age as she and I are. And so, I don't know, I felt like my life and struggles, in the movement have been in parallel to a lot of hers. And also she worked with some organizations that, I'm familiar with and have known of and stuff like that in California. And she also is very good for beginners, because she provides a lot of background and kind of general orientation for people who are new to the movement, which I think a lot of people coming in, starting to follow a hashtag or starting to follow like an Instagram page or whatever, but without much, experience, knowing who the political actors are and what a movement is and how do you organize and what's a protest and what's, all that kind of stuff. She provides a lot of that. Despite that, there was a lot of stuff I know already, but there was some interesting learnings that came along with reading this book. And it's very practical in the sense that she's talking about her experiences and talking about theory in a way that it matters for building movements. So it's a lot of good lessons, and I really think a lot of organizers should read this, especially if you're looking into doing like electoral organizing. She believes in engaging the electorate, and I know there's a big debate about that, but she makes convincing argument for it, and yeah, so I think it's good to inform movement organizers. Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza. And the most recent book in this category that my partner and we read this one out loud together is called Abolish ICE. It's by Natascha, Elena, Uhlmann. And it's very short. It's out on OR Books, which is a great publishing house to sign up on their newsletter for. They do sales and stuff sometimes. It did seem like it was kind of rushed to print because Abolish ICE became kind of like a hashtag or something that was really trending during the previous administration, the Trump administration. And a lot of it is basically just about the reality of the injustice of immigration law and about detention centers and what ICE does, which a lot of that is stuff that, that's my day-to-day life, what I live and do and breathe every day. So a lot of that wasn't new, but despite that, I did have some learnings, which was good. And I found out that there was a lot of citations. If you look, there's footnotes, and she cites articles and stuff like that. And some of those articles were written by people I know, people that wrote me letters of recommendation and stuff like that. So it's very user friendly, very reader friendly. You can get through this really quickly and come up to speed very quickly about what is the injustices faced by the immigrant community in the United States now, and during the Trump era, which not that much has changed since the new president came in. So abolish ICE, and yes, we need to abolish ICE.